All right, so judgment has been reserved in President Cyril Ramaphosa's challenge of the private prosecution bid against him, where at the same time, the independence of the National Prosecuting Authority was also thrust into the spotlight. We'll be having this conversation with our reporter Canny Maphanga, who's standing by for the latest with regards to that case. Obviously, we heard senior counsel Dalim Pofu coming out in defense of former President Jacob Zuma at this point. Last year, the NPA released a statement, as we know, clarifying the nolle prosequi certificates that it issued, saying that it was not in relation to the president. Let's take a look at, or listen rather, to what the senior counsel Dalim Pofu had to say.
Logical why any right-thinking person would resort to preliminary litigation when they have an avenue that could even result in their acquittal. But the other, to emphasize that point, and that point goes to why are we here? We're here for what Justice Wallace calls the propensity of well-resourced, prominent people to engage in delaying tactics.
All right, so we are joined here in studio by SABC News reporter Canny Maphanga to unpack proceedings in that case. Canny, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon to you, Liesl, and the viewers at home.
It's been an illustrious few days, to say the least, perhaps hearing arguments from both sides. We also know now that judgment has been reserved. So perhaps you can take us through what transpired today.
Well, today was really about the former president's final arguments. We did have an instance where they were supposed to complete their arguments at 11. Advocate Dalim Pofu continued until 11:30. Then there was that complaint made by the former president, rather, that he was being curtailed in his arguments. So there was that application of sorts to get further time, which was dismissed by the full bench. We saw a bit of tension there between the two parties, but they finally brought those arguments to an end, and yes, judgment has been reserved.
Canny, the issues of jurisdiction, whether the president's objection should be argued in the civil court versus a criminal court, was something that came to the fore. We also saw the unfair treatment of the former president Jacob Zuma also being cited as a reason. Walk us through how that came across in court today in terms of arguments.
Well, Lisa, the second point you referred to, that was the application that I was talking about that the full bench dismissed. They demonstrated through the time that was allocated to the former president in comparison to the other parties that they were extremely accommodated in listing out their concerns and their arguments. Now, if we move to the jurisdiction argument, that was a main theme, I would say, that took place throughout the two-day hearing. It was, we have a matter emanating in the criminal court, and now we have the civil court entertaining this matter, instead of the applicant, which is the president, heading towards that criminal court to defend his rights, rather. You've heard from the former president, his argument is that this court, the civil court that you see us sitting in over the past 2 days, lacks jurisdiction over this matter. And the statute which governs criminal proceedings states that when you get to the plea stage, that is when you can raise your concerns about right to prosecute. And we've seen it in different cases. AfriForum, the lobby group, is quite well known for their private prosecutions involving high-profile names such as Julius Malema, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, even the former president's son. We've seen them been hauled to the criminal court, defended their cases there, were acquitted, etc. However, each case, I might add, needs to be seen in context, because the main contention here is a process that led up to the private prosecution itself. And the president himself is arguing that it's constitutionally flawed. So he's saying his fundamental rights allow him to approach the civil courts, and there's no legislation that precludes him from going to the civil court to say that my fundamental rights will be infringed upon if I am hauled before the criminal dock over a constitutionally flawed process. Well, that is his argument.
Now the judgment has been reserved. I wonder if we could unpack what possible scenarios are at play here. What are the implications for the former president, Jacob Zuma, if he loses? What are the implications for President Cyril Ramaphosa? Let's even relate it to the step-aside rule of the African National Congress at large.
Okay, well, we can start at the relief sought by the president. He's seeking a final interdict, the setting aside of those summons and the nolle prosequi certificates that were issued to be declared invalid, unlawful, and unconstitutional. Now, I'm sure you've heard from our colleague and friend here at the SABC, Mr. Benedict Perry, regarding final interdicts and how difficult they are to secure in these type of review hearings. So it's highly unlikely that this court would make that kind of a finding, rather refer the matter back for consideration for that process to take place properly. But if, let's say those nolle prosequi certificates were declared unlawful, then the president wouldn't be halted from ever continuing with the private prosecution. Remember, the final interdict would mean that he couldn't continue with it now or in the future. So let's say if they pursued a process that was according to the president, constitutionally valid, you would still be able to go and try to pursue this matter again. But a final interdict kind of puts the lid on it and says that this matter is final. So I'm not going to try preempt what the full bench is going to decide, but there have been a lot of interesting arguments from both sides, including the amicus, who've raised this very important issue of the independence of the NPA.
Yes.
That emanated out of, you will remember that when these summons were first issued, or when the nolle prosequi certificates became public, the NPA issued out a statement clarifying that it didn't apply to the president when they issued them out. And that statement came from the NPA head office, and we know that those certificates were issued out by DPP in KZN. So they raised the issues of the independence of the NPA when dealing with matters like this, when you are approached to prosecute high-profile persons or businessmen. I mean, take the president out of the equation. Any further matter that could occur like this, the issue of independence was quite important and paramount when they concluded their arguments today.
Canny, I just wonder, given what's transpired, the timing of all of this heading into elections come 2024, is this likely to be the last legal tussle between the former president, Jacob Zuma, and President Cyril Ramaphosa, just given what is at stake?
Well, you never know, but the former president has come to court to state that this has nothing to do with politics. That is his argument before the court. And we've heard Advocate Dalimpofu stating that the court has no option but to accept that version of his. We do know that at NASREC, they did affirm the step-aside resolution, and we know what that means and how it's applied without fear or favor, or that's how they intend for it to be applied. So if that matter were to go to the criminal proceedings, or the president were to be charged, the expectation would be that that step-aside resolution would fall into place. But the former president is charging that that has nothing to do with the matter, and this all deals with his common theme of the alleged disclosure of his health records by a senior prosecutor and a journalist, which he alleges that it is compromise on the NPA and its functions rather, and the criminal justice system as a whole. So he has centered this whole entire issue regarding the this common theme, stating that he attempted to resolve the matter outside of court by seeking that assistance and seeking the president to use his powers to establish a commission of inquiry into the alleged breach, and only approach the courts as a last resort. So it'll be interesting after all those arguments to see how the full bench concludes or decides on these many issues that have been presented before them.
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, we know the NPA is an independent institution that operates on its own without the president exerting powers. So lots at stake here. Let's see what unfolds. Thank you very much for joining us, Canny Maphanga, our reporter, giving us an update. As we heard early on, judgment has been reserved in President Cyril Ramaphosa's challenge of the private prosecution bid against him.